They'd tried to break the new girl in front of 50 phones and 100 watching eyes, but what they didn't know was that she had come to break a system. 3 boys, 1 hallway, a sentence so racist it silenced the whole school. But what happened next? That's the part nobody saw coming. But first, leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. "Look what the wind blew into our school," Tyler Morrison sneered, planting himself in front of her like he owned the floor. It was Zara Williams' second day at Lincoln Academy, a place where the walls smelled like money and the truth got scrubbed cleaner than the marble floors. Tyler's voice echoed in the hallway, and the laughter that followed was the kind that left paper cuts on the soul. At least this time, they didn't send an ugly monkey. 50 students froze. Some gasped, others reached for their phones, but no one spoke. No one moved. The hallway didn't just go quiet, it held its breath. And Zara, she didn't flinch. What kind of boy laughs while shoving a girl into silence? And what kind of girl answers with something louder than a scream? She stood there, her back straight, her hands relaxed by her side. Not defensive, not afraid. There was something in the way she looked at Tyler that said she'd seen worse. She had. Jake Sullivan circled around to her right, grinning like a wolf who thought the lamb hadn't noticed. "You got a mouth on you? Or don't you speak English?" he spat. Then came Brandon Pierce, completing their circle like they were closing in on a prize. "Maybe she's used to bananas instead of apples for lunch," he said, twisting his face into a grin so crude even some of their usual lackeys looked away. Zara didn't move, but her eyes, oh, those eyes, calm, still, dangerous. It was the stillness you feel when thunder's about to answer back. "I need to get to class," she said. Soft but sharp, like silk sliding over glass just before it breaks. Tyler puffed up. "Sweetheart, you're at the wrong school. Yours is across town." And that's when she smiled. A smile that didn't belong in that moment. A smile that made 2 kids near the lockers step back instinctively. A smile like the first crack in a dam. Quiet. Inevitable. "Interesting," she murmured. "Tyler Morrison, son of the mayor. Jake Sullivan, your dad owns that overpriced dealership. Brandon Pierce, Pierce & Sons law firm, right?" The color drained from their faces. How did she know that? Why did she say it like a prosecutor building a case? "You really think you can do this here, in front of everyone, and it won't come back to bite you?" she said. And suddenly, it wasn't just a girl talking. It was something else. Something heavier. Tyler stepped closer, voice lower now, but not braver. "Listen here, you—" "I'd think twice before finishing that sentence," she said, her eyes locking onto his like a sniper. Her stance wasn't just calm, it was trained. Her fists weren't clenched, but they were ready. Her feet were positioned like someone who understood balance, leverage, impact. Some kids in the crowd, especially the ones with older siblings in the military or who trained in jiu-jitsu, shifted uncomfortably. They saw it. The signs. This wasn't a girl who got lucky with words. This was a girl who knew how to finish a fight without ever throwing the first punch. Then came the sound that broke the moment, like glass hitting tile. "What's going on here?" Principal Reynolds' voice cut through the heat. Tyler's smirk flipped like a light switch. Suddenly he was the golden boy again. "Nothing much, Principal, just welcoming our new classmate." The principal's eyes darted from the circle of students to Zara, who hadn't moved an inch. "Ms. Williams, everything all right?" "Perfectly," she replied, her voice like honey laced with steel. "Just getting to know my new classmates." Reynolds looked suspicious, but not surprised. He gave the boys a warning glance and moved on. And just like that, the crowd dispersed. But something had shifted. Zara walked to her locker like nothing had happened. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were lit with something quiet and relentless. The 3 boys whispered as they retreated, but the phones were still recording. The hallway was still watching. And for the first time, someone had made the kings of Lincoln Academy blink. Let this sink in. Sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. Sometimes the one standing still is the one you should fear most. That moment, one girl, 3 bullies, 50 witnesses, wasn't just about high school politics. It was about something far more real, the kind of strength you don't see coming, and the kind of courage that doesn't ask permission. And if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or talked down to because of who you are, share this. Because the world doesn't change by staying quiet. It changes when one calm voice calls the bluff on cruelty, and the storm it brings, that's not chaos. That's justice. Don't scroll past this moment. Subscribe. Stay tuned. Because this was only rehearsal. The real performance hasn't even started. Monday hadn't broken her, so Tuesday tried harder. When Zara opened her locker and her books spilled out, soaked and shredded, she didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, silent as a sermon, while soggy algebra pages flopped onto the floor like drowned birds. A crowd gathered again, not out of cruelty but confusion, because this wasn't how victims acted. Victims flinched, victims cried. Zara just stared at the mess, pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. One clean click, then another, like a tourist documenting a battlefield. What nobody realized was that each snapshot was a chess piece, and the board was getting very crowded. The next day, her backpack was strung from the tallest oak in the courtyard, zipped shut and dangling like a lynched warning. Half the school laughed. The other half just stared. But there was something colder than cruelty in the way Zara looked up at it, something that didn't blink. A few students wondered, quietly, how she was so calm. They didn't know she'd spent 5 years turning rage into form, pain into performance. Her fists weren't just weapons. They were disciplines. That night, as Tyler lay on his bed scrolling through the videos, snickering at the one where her notebook was shoved into a toilet, he grinned and said, "She'll crack by Monday, they always do." But Jake's smile was thinner now, and even Brandon was starting to shift his weight differently, like he wasn't sure where this road ended. Suspense works both ways. The predator waits, but so does the trap. Thursday brought spray paint. 3 crude words slashed across her cafeteria table like a public execution. A teacher walked by and visibly looked away. The message wasn't subtle, but then again, racism rarely is. Zara didn't sit at another table. She wiped the paint with her sleeve, stared at the table like it had personally disappointed her, and took another picture. No tears, no reaction, just documentation. At the far end of the room, Jake whispered, "Everyone has a limit," and Tyler leaned in, his grin sharp. Monday. Watch. She'll beg us to stop. Maybe cry. Maybe run. But even as he said it, the silence in the cafeteria was no longer fun. It was waiting for something. Something they couldn't see coming. Here's the part that matters. Zara didn't stay because she was trying to prove something to them. She stayed because she was building something they couldn't touch. Each act of cruelty was another piece of evidence, another weight on the scale. What they saw as shame, she stored as strategy. Because you don't destroy your enemies in silence. You let them decorate the courtroom themselves. And unknown to them, a witness had already stepped forward. Professor Marcus Thompson, the school's PE instructor with Olympic rings tattooed on his wrist and secrets in his past, had been watching. On Friday afternoon, as Zara walked off the field after gym class, he didn't speak right away, just studied the way she adjusted her stance before a sprint, the way she lowered her center of gravity before a dodgeball throw. Finally, in the hallway, he said, "You fight." She didn't answer immediately. But her pause was enough. He smiled. "I saw it in your form. That's not high school gym instinct. That's trained awareness. Controlled muscle memory. Who taught you?" Zara met his eyes and said, "My brother got beat up when I was 12. My mother found a gym. I've been there since." Professor Thompson nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they've just met a future champion. Smart mother. Smarter daughter. Then he handed her a form, not flashy, just a standard athletic sign-up sheet. We've got a martial arts demonstration Monday. For the board, for sponsors, for the mayor. I want you in it." Zara blinked. "They don't know who I am." Thompson smiled faintly. "Exactly. Let's keep it that way until Monday." And that was the shift. Because on that quiet Friday, in a janitor-scented hallway most students ignored, Zara signed her name to something more than just an event. She signed her way into revelation, into reckoning, into power. That form wasn't just paper, it was permission to change the narrative, to take the bullying and flip it into a blueprint for transformation, not just for herself, but for every silent kid watching. Because this story wasn't hers alone. This story belonged to every girl who was told to shrink, every student who was made to feel like an outsider in their own school, every adult who once sat in those desks and remembers how it felt to be invisible, but not anymore. By the time she handed the form back, Thompson had already started setting things in motion. He wasn't just a coach, he was a strategist, a witness to too many privileged kids who never learned consequences. And this time, he whispered under his breath, they picked the wrong girl, the wrong storm, the wrong legacy. While the boys prepped another prank, Zara prepped for war. Not the kind with fists, but the kind with facts, finesse, and a front-row audience. So, here's your takeaway, if you've ever been in Zara's shoes. You don't always get justice right away. Sometimes the system looks the other way. Sometimes the bullies laugh longer than they should. But if you can hold your center, if you can stay calm while they unravel, you get something better than revenge. You get clarity. And from clarity comes control. The next time someone underestimates you, don't react, document. Don't break, build. And when the moment comes, don't shout, show. Let the silence do the talking and let your truth do the damage. If this sounds like your story, if you've ever been pushed, mocked, overlooked, then remember this. They can smear your name on a desk, but they can't stain your purpose. They can try to erase your dignity, but they'll never hold the pen if you hold the truth. Subscribe and stay with this story, because Monday's not just a school day, it's opening night, and Tyler Morrison is about to find out what happens when the girl he tried to bury decides to bloom. The weekend came cloaked in silence, but Zara filled it with sound. The rhythmic thud of fists against leather, the short bursts of breath from deep in her lungs, the subtle shifting of feet on basement concrete. Each punch she threw wasn't for damage. It was for clarity. Her knuckles carved air like sentences in a closing argument. Her sweat fell like punctuation marks, and her silence was rehearsed like poetry. Upstairs, her mother paced. For years, Sharon Williams had shielded her daughter like a mother lion behind steel bars. But now, watching from the stairwell, she felt like she was staring at a storm she could no longer hold back. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked softly. Zara's eyes didn't leave the bag. "I was polite, I reported them, I waited for the adults to fix it. But you saw what they did, Mom. Nothing changed." Then she stopped, looked her mother straight in the eyes, and said it without rage, without fear, just with weight. "I tried their way. Now I try mine." On the other side of town, Tyler Morrison was staging a performance of his own. His room, once a haven of trophies and privilege, was now a war room. He and his two shadows were huddled around a phone, watching clips, rehearsing lines. "Today she begs," Tyler said, the words rolling off his tongue like a dare to the universe. "Recess. Center courtyard. I want 50 people watching. She'll cry, she'll run, and we'll own it." Jake chuckled, but his laugh cracked at the edges. Brandon nodded but looked at the floor. Somewhere between arrogance and apprehension, doubt had crept in, but Tyler was too drunk on dominance to notice. They'd spent years breaking people. What was one more girl? But what they didn't know, what they'd never suspect, was that Zara had been behind them in the hallway when Tyler said it, that she had quietly slipped into the shadows, hit record on her phone, and captured every smug syllable. The camera didn't shake. Neither did she. She walked away from their trap with a smile they would come to fear. It wasn't the grin of revenge, it was the calm of a surgeon before the first incision. Her plan wasn't built from anger, it was built from architecture. Monday was no longer a threat, it was a stage, and she wasn't the victim in this play, she was the playwright. The irony? They gave her the script. On Monday morning, Zara moved through the school like fog before a storm. Cool, quiet, impossible to hold. She wore her usual uniform, nothing dramatic. No fists clenched, no battle cry. But she was armored in something stronger than steel. Certainty. While the students whispered and waited for the show they thought Tyler would direct, Zara was already pacing her own mental runway. Every breath she took in first period was a meditation. Every glance in second period was calculated. And in third period, she smiled when she saw the gym lights being tested and the podium being set. The board meeting would start soon. The investors would be seated. The audience would be built by accident. What Tyler didn't know was that the crowd he wanted would be filled with people who mattered more than he'd ever fear. At 2:30 p.m., Tyler was electric. His confidence radiated like neon. It blinded him to consequence. Surrounded by Jake and Brandon, he stood in the center courtyard, cell phone in hand, ready to press record. "She'll cry," he whispered. "I bet $50 she begs. Maybe we make her kneel." The cruelty in his voice was casual, refined. He'd weaponized humiliation so many times it had become a second language. What none of them noticed, too wrapped in their imagined triumph, was the girl sitting on the far bench. Alone. Reading. Still. But she wasn't alone. Tucked between her history book's pages was her phone, and it was recording. Every word, every smirk, every threat. That phone was her scalpel. And justice? Justice doesn't yell. It listens. By 2:45 p.m., the school gym pulsed with anticipation. Zara stood in the locker room, calm as a heartbeat, wrapping her hands in cloth with precision. Each loop of tape wasn't for protection. It was ritual. As she finished tightening the final strip, she paused, looked in the mirror. Not to admire, to remember who she was, who she refused to be, who they thought she'd never become. Tyler's performance was about to begin, but he didn't know she had rewritten the ending. Because this was never about showing off strength. It was about showing what grace looks like under fire. It was about teaching everyone watching that the most dangerous kind of power doesn't come with noise. It comes with discipline. Her fists weren't clenched because she was angry. They were taped because she was ready. Not to fight, but to reveal. And that's the part most people forget. When you're being pushed, mocked, cornered, the answer isn't always a louder voice. Sometimes it's quieter steps. Sometimes it's stillness so strong, the ground underneath your bullies starts to question its own weight. Zara didn't train to destroy them. She trained to outlast them. She trained to wait until the system would have to look. Because no matter how loud they laughed, no matter how bold their threats, Monday was coming, and Monday didn't belong to Tyler anymore. If you've ever held back your fire because the world told you to stay small, if you've ever documented the pain while the world applauded your silence, then let this story remind you, you're not powerless. You're just preparing, and when your moment comes, let them laugh. Because the laugh always dies first. Truth doesn't need volume. It just needs the right stage. So, stay with this. Don't look away. Don't scroll past. Because Monday at exactly 3:00 p.m., Zara Williams is stepping onto a mat, not to fight, but to unveil. And trust me, after that moment, the word victim will never sit comfortably next to her name again. At exactly 3:00 p.m., the lights in the gym dimmed. Rows of chairs lined the polished hardwood floor, filled with Lincoln Academy's finest. School board members, private investors, parents with portfolios thicker than textbooks. They weren't here for Zara. They didn't know her name, not yet. They were here to nod politely at whatever sports demo the school had promised. They came expecting cheerleaders and banners, maybe a few handshakes and a speech from the mayor. They didn't realize they were about to witness a storm dressed in discipline. Professor Thompson stepped up to the mic. He didn't bother with theatrics. He didn't need them. His voice was low, measured, almost too casual. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Today we'd like to introduce a new member of our athletic program. Please welcome our newest scholarship recipient, state junior MMA champion, Zara Williams. A pause, then the gasp. The mayor, seated front row with his arms folded, blinked. A man 2 rows back dropped his phone. Several students froze like statues in a museum of disbelief. Tyler Morrison, standing near the bleachers with a smirk half-formed on his face, turned a shade paler than even he expected. His mouth opened, then closed. No words. No exit. Zara stepped onto the mat like a secret revealed. She wore no expression, only focus. Her hair pulled back, her hands taped, her posture relaxed, yet unmistakably trained. If grace could stand its ground, it would look like her. 3 volunteer wrestlers stepped forward. Bigger boys, each one taller, broader, visibly stronger. They weren't laughing, not anymore. The first came at her fast. He lasted 15 seconds. Zara slipped behind him like wind around a wall and had him on the floor in one breathless motion, his arm trapped beneath her own. Tap out. Release. The crowd clapped. The second lasted 20 seconds, his balance undone by a sweep that landed with a thud and a collective wince. The third resisted. He wrestled back. He growled and spun and charged, but Zara pivoted, locked and dropped him into a leg trap so perfect it looked rehearsed. He tapped before pain, not out of fear, out of respect. There was no celebration, no grin, no taunt. Zara stood, bowed slightly, and turned toward the audience. Her chest didn't rise fast. Her hands didn't tremble. She walked to the microphone with the same quiet control she'd held since day one. Then she looked up, and in that still gym filled with people who now couldn't look away, she said, "Before I leave this mat, I have something to show you." The projector behind her came alive. First, a photo. Her locker, vandalized. Next, her bag hanging from a tree. Then the cafeteria table. Then screenshots. Slurs. Hate. Threats. The crowd murmured. Several gasped. One investor leaned back and muttered something no one could hear. Then came the audio. Tyler's voice first, sharp and clean. "She'll cry. She'll beg." Laughter followed. Jake's, Brandon's, then, "At least this time they didn't send an ugly monkey." Brandon's voice. And then silence, not in the recording but in the room. Thick, suffocating silence. All eyes turned. No one laughed. Not now. On screen, Zara's final photo, a close-up of the 3 boys huddled around a phone. The timestamp matched the moment she'd been sitting on that bench, her phone recording from the pages of a history book. History, indeed. Mayor Morrison stood, red in the face, fury radiating off him like heat. "Tyler Morrison," he said, voice quivering with betrayal. "What does this mean?" But Tyler didn't answer. He couldn't. His mouth opened again, but only a choked breath came out. Professor Thompson returned to the mic, his tone no longer polite. "What you just witnessed does not represent Lincoln Academy. It is the rot we must excise. Effective immediately, Tyler Morrison, Jake Sullivan, and Brandon Pierce are suspended permanently, and this evidence is being forwarded to the proper authorities." Chaos unfurled like a banner. Some parents shouted, some clapped, some pulled their children closer. And Zara, she stepped away from the mic and stood in the center of the mat again, unmoved, unbroken. What mattered most wasn't the punishment, it was the reversal. The ones who had controlled the narrative were now exposed by their own performance. Zara didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence was more powerful than their screaming ever was. She had spoken with actions, with patience, with the quiet fury of someone who knows their worth is not up for debate. And this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth made visible. So ask yourself, what if every target of cruelty had the resources, the presence, and the strength to respond this way? What if every system that rewards the loudest voice was challenged by someone who refused to shout back, but refused even more to back down? Zara wasn't just fighting that day. She was performing a eulogy for their arrogance, for the way they'd weaponized comfort, for the lie that money, power, or heritage could ever replace character. If this moment shakes you, if it stirs something you thought you'd buried, let it. Let it stir. Let it remind you that injustice, when exposed in the right light, always blinks first. And if you've ever been told to keep quiet, to take it, to wait it out, remember this: the most devastating truth doesn't shout, it shows up. And it stays. Stay with this story, because when the dust clears, the question won't be what Zara did, it'll be what the world does next. And it starts with you. Justice didn't stop when the projector dimmed and the audience filed out of the gym with wide eyes and shallow breaths. No, justice had a longer reach. It followed them home. It showed up in inboxes, on news feeds, in whispered conversations at dinner tables. By morning, the clip of Zara's speech, of the boys' words echoing through a stunned gym, had gone viral. Not school viral. Country viral. 17 universities quietly removed Tyler Morrison's name from their early admission lists. Some didn't reply at all. Others were more direct. Given recent revelations regarding your conduct, we are rescinding our offer of consideration. His father tried calling in favors, but the silence on the other end of the phone lines was louder than a slammed door. Power, it turns out, doesn't protect you from the mirror. And the internet? Jake Sullivan's father tried to outpace the fallout by flooding social media with deals at the dealership, but no one was buying. Cars or apologies, organized boycotts took root like wildfire, contracts vanished, phone calls turned cold. In 4 months, the dealership closed. Jake went from polishing rims on luxury vehicles to washing them for tips at a car wash across town. He wore sunglasses indoors now, not for style, but for customers whispered, co-workers stared. Some even recognized his voice before they recognized his face. He scrubbed doors that once opened for him, and every time he reached for a soapy rag, he also reached for a piece of humility he never knew he needed. Brendan Pierce watched his house go quiet in stages. First, the meetings in his father's law office stopped. Then the employees stopped. Then, one day, the locks were changed, not by rivals, but by the reality of reputation. Clients withdrew. Lawsuits arrived. Allegations multiplied. His parents, once a well-tailored power couple, fell into silence, then shouting, then legal paperwork of their own. Divorce, bitter and public, and no lawyer in town would take their case. Brandon stayed behind closed curtains, a prince without a kingdom, staring at textbooks he could no longer afford to believe in. And then, one rainy afternoon, the most unexpected echo arrived, not on screens, but in person. Zara was gathering her books after class when she saw the figure sitting in a parked car outside the school. No chauffeur, no press, just a man in a suit that no longer fit the title. Mayor Morrison sat slouched behind the wheel, hands clasped, eyes empty. When Zara stepped outside, he opened the door, but didn't move. His voice was thin, worn. "Miss Williams, I know I have no right to ask anything, but may I speak with you?" She nodded once. No performance, no tension. Just two people, broken in different ways. He didn't try to excuse his son. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just spoke. "I failed as a father. I raised a boy who thought hurting someone made him strong. I taught him to win, but I never taught him why he shouldn't need to. I never taught him what losing meant when it mattered most." He looked down. "You did in one day what I didn't do in 17 years. Zara didn't flinch. She didn't soften, but she listened. And when he finished, she said something that changed the weight of the moment. It's never too late to start over. But starting over doesn't mean forgetting. It means working, quietly, daily, until your name means something different. That was the difference. Redemption wasn't granted, it was offered, then earned. And Morrison took the offer, slowly, deliberately. He resigned from 3 committees and enrolled in a community service program he once called a PR gimmick. He volunteered at local shelters, not with a camera crew, but with rolled-up sleeves and shaking hands. One day, someone asked him to mop the floors, and he did it. No speech, no protest, just a former mayor, holding a wet mop like a man cleaning up more than just tile. The quietest surprise came weeks later. One Saturday morning, he showed up with someone else. Tyler. He didn't speak much. He just stood next to his father, holding boxes, sorting supplies, hauling chairs. Someone tried to snap a photo, but the mayor shook his head. "Not for show," he said, "not this time." And that's how it began. Atonement not with noise, but with presence. Tyler didn't smile. He didn't apologize with words, but he showed up again the next weekend, and the one after that. And slowly the image of a boy who once mocked someone in a hallway began to fade into the image of a boy who now listened while others spoke. For the audience watching this unfold, not the one in the gym, but the one at home, online, in offices, and on front porches, this story did more than deliver justice. It redefined it. Because here's the truth. Accountability isn't revenge. It's correction. And when the powerful fall, what they do next defines their legacy far more than their disgrace. Zara never wanted to destroy them. She wanted the system to recognize what it allowed and what it ignored. And through that recognition, she changed more than 3 boys. She changed a school, a town, a conversation. If you're still listening, and you're wondering what to take from this, let it be this. When cruelty hides behind confidence, it must be unmasked. When privilege is mistaken for permission, it must be revoked. And when the truth is finally given a mic, it doesn't have to scream. It just needs to speak clearly, like Zara did. And maybe, just maybe, we all need to ask ourselves, what kind of legacy are we leaving? Are we the bystanders who say nothing? Are we the ones who laugh with the crowd? Or are we the ones who listen when the storm is still gathering, who say enough before the microphone is even switched on? Don't just watch justice. Work for it. Because some legacies are built in boardrooms, but the ones that last, they start in parking lots where someone finally decides to change. Keep watching. Because Zara's not finished, and neither is the movement she just started. 6 months later, the halls of Lincoln Academy didn't echo the same way. The silence that once trailed Zara Williams had become something else entirely, a kind of reverence. It wasn't about fear or fame. It was about the way change walks, quiet but permanent. Where students used to duck their heads or whisper behind lockers, now they leaned in. Now they asked questions. "Zara, can you show me how to stand like you did? Zara, what do I say when someone tries to break me down?" Her answers never came from anger. They came from knowing. And knowing for her had never been a luxury. It had been a necessity. Zara didn't become a leader by chasing titles. They came to her. First, the student council nomination. Then, by unanimous vote, its presidency. Not because she campaigned, because she showed up. She created a mentorship program that paired freshmen with seniors trained in empathy, not ego. She started self-defense classes in the gym on Thursday afternoons. At first, it was 5 girls, then 10, then 30. Within weeks, they had to move to the auditorium. But what she taught wasn't just how to block a punch. It was how to hold your head high when the world throws low blows. One girl, barely 13, whispered to her after class, "I used to be scared to come to school, but now I walk like I know something." Zara just smiled. That was the point. Even Principal Reynolds, once passive in the face of school politics, was changed. He stood at the edge of a self-defense class one afternoon, arms crossed, watching Zara teach a group of students how to regain their balance after a fall. When the class ended, he approached her, not as an administrator, but as a man humbled by growth. "You've done more in 6 months than I've managed in 15 years, he said. "You didn't just fix something here. You raised the standard." Zara nodded once. She didn't need the praise, but she knew the weight of it, and in that small moment she recognized something bigger than vindication. She had become a blueprint. Then came graduation. The air buzzed with applause, sunlight poured through gymnasium windows, and proud families filled the rows like chapters in a collective story. Zara stepped up to the podium, wearing the valedictorian sash, not as a trophy, but as a torch. She scanned the crowd, her mother in the front, clutching tissues, Professor Thompson behind her, standing because he wouldn't sit for this moment, and to the side, Mayor Morrison, hands folded, eyes glistening. Zara cleared her throat. No microphone feedback, no nerves, just voice, steady and earned. "A year and a half ago," she began, "I arrived at this school thinking the best way to survive was to be small, to stay quiet, to disappear into the background. But I learned something." She paused, not for effect, but to breathe the truth into the air. Power doesn't live in hiding. Power grows when you choose to be seen, when you decide that dignity is not negotiable, when you understand that true strength is building something they can't destroy. A beat of silence. Then a wave. Applause thundered through the room. Her mother stood, weeping. Thompson smiled, hands clasped behind his back. The mayor wiped his eyes, and for the first time in that building's history, justice didn't just arrive, it graduated. But Zara's story didn't end at that podium. It stretched forward. 2 years later, she was walking the halls of Harvard Law School, case books in hand, mind sharper than ever, voice stronger. She studied civil rights, systemic reform, and the architecture of oppression, not as theory, but as mission. While others studied injustice in lectures, Zara had lived it in hallways and locker rooms. She wasn't there to chase prestige. She was there to open locked doors for those still waiting in the cold. And when she spoke in class, professors didn't interrupt. They leaned in. Because you don't interrupt a force, you learn from it. Professor Thompson, now retired, still called her once a month. He'd answer the phone with the same line every time. "How's the revolution going?" She'd laugh, modestly. But one day, he said something that stuck. "You didn't just change those boys. You changed generations. And the generations they'll raise. You didn't end a cycle. You rewired it." Zara didn't say much in reply. But that night, she added a note to her growing list of future goals. Build programs for at-risk youth, not just defense classes. Legal empowerment, conflict navigation, civic action, because it was never just about her fight. It was about making sure no one else had to fight alone. So what's left? What final line can sum up the girl who turned silence into strategy, who turned pain into performance, who walked into a school as prey and left it as precedent? Maybe it's this. Maybe it's a voiceover, echoing through the end of this story, soft but unshakable. Revenge is loud, but dignity? Dignity whispers, and the world still listens. If that hits you, good. Let it. Let it echo inside your ribs like a bell that was always meant to ring, because we don't need more noise. We need more clarity, more strength in silence, more resolve in stillness, and more people like Zara, who show us that you don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard. So ask yourself, what will your echo sound like? What legacy are you building? If you've ever been written off, underestimated, or pushed into a corner, maybe this is your moment. Not to shout back, but to rise like you were always meant to. Start today. The world is listening. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.